We're going to start with one of the best, former government special advisor, good friend of mine, James Price. Welcome to Talk Drive. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well, sir. How are you?
I'm all right. I've got to share a story with you today because Jodie and Ryan have been hard at it today trying to book guests. And I said, have you phoned James? Oh, we've left copious messages and he's very, very busy. So I rang you, and on the second ring, you picked it up and it's all organised. So I'm having them in for training next week on how to book a guest. What do you reckon?
It's my fault. I was identifying as somebody who was too busy to pick up the call.
There you are. Talking about that story very quickly, for a bit of fun, before we get political, this is a genuinely true story, Jay. BBC bosses were left red-faced after advertising for a job role which encouraged candidates who identified as dead to apply. Is this not symptomatic of how the world has gone bleeding nuts, seriously?
Yeah, it's identifying as brain dead, certainly. But no, maybe even this was a typo or something. But these sorts of stories are the end result of when instead of having everybody identify as being British, right, or identifying as just an individual, because as Ayn Rand said, the smallest minority in the world is the individual. When people go, actually, well, I'm a half this and a half that and half the other. None of this stuff is useful as a way of categorizing people. We should be judging people based on the content of their character and their actions rather than anything else at all. And the end result of a country we live in right now that feels less united, it feels less happy, it feels less safe and secure and prosperous is because people are so busy looking in and saying, well, as half this and half that, rather than saying, no, I'm British and I'm a good person and I want to do right.
And is it not, as I was saying to the excellent Kate Barker, CEO of the LGBT movement yesterday, and we were talking about this, this madness that seems to be perpetuated. And I said to her, I believe that a lot of these causes, for example, Just Stop Oil, I don't blimmin' well know what Just Stop Oil stand for, because all I see is a great amount of unwashed, probably middle-class people whose Mallorca holidays are on an Airbnb, blocking roads and being a pain in the backside. I believe that so many things that we might be able to discuss and debate in a civilised society are being hijacked by this mob. Right, and I said to Kate, she agreed with me yesterday. She was telling me about trans lesbians. I mean, I don't think, well, it's a man, isn't it? I've got to the point, and people of my generation, where you don't know what to say. You don't, not me, but you know what I mean? I see people are too scared to say, I'm this, I believe in that, I want to do this, I've just done that. I literally found myself the other day, and people will laugh, right? I actually found myself, I was on a train, and I was going to let a woman go in front of me, James. And this is a dead serious thing. I didn't do it. That's against every part of who I was brought up to be. But I imagined somebody might turn around and say, well, why are you offering me to go first? Do you think I'm weaker than you? The world's changed, mate. It really has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I do the same thing if I'm walking down the street with a female colleague or a friend or something. I the old school, will insist on standing on the roadside, and I'll preface it by saying, look, I'm a frightful bigot. I've got to do this. I'm sorry. That's
what I'm going to say. I'm going to do that from now on.
But this stuff is done on purpose, by the way, right? You go and read 1984, and they realize that the powers that be in that book, that they control the language and they control how people can think and behave. Every edition of the dictionary in 1984 gets a little bit slimmer to constrict people's thinking. And we've gone from talking about colored people to black people to people of color, all these changes there, changes in when you call people queer to gay to LGBT, all these sorts of things. And it's all a way of trying to keep people messing up and saying things wrong and all the rest of it.
Let me tell you a story that I didn't get a chance to tell you the other day. I told it last week on the show, and it still completely floors me. Lorraine is one of my greatest mates. She's worked with me for many, many years. Worked for me, right? Great girl, right? Literally says it as it is, Cockney. She said to me the other day, I genuinely think the world's gone nuts, Joe. So what's happened now? Said, I've got a niece, right? Niece, came to stay. She said to me, just so you're aware, Auntie Lolo, I now identify as queer. She went, what? Are you into women? That's fine. She went, no, I'm not into women. No, I've never looked at a woman. But by identifying as queer, that gives me a label that means if that's something I want to do in the future, I can do it. And she just went, I don't get it, Jez. I seriously don't. I mean, how does that genuinely, and I'm going to sound like one of those terrible people that go on television, I've got some amazing friends who happen to be gay. I couldn't care. Why do people have to walk around saying, I think I'm going to identify as queer just in case one day I am? That's ludicrous.
Look, I'm one of the 7 straight men left in the Conservative Party. No one comes second to me as a friend of Dorothy. And it's not about any of these things, right?
Yeah.
We've won the big battles when it comes to legal equality for gay people,
yeah.
Right? And that's a wonderful thing. And it was something that was fought And we've got to a point now, and you think, well, maybe we've got to this point now, and everybody can just come down and they can down tools and they can move on to other more interesting things. The problem is that all that kind of campaigning infrastructure that was put in place for that great victory has now gone, oh, actually, we need to find another target for this. And that's why I think that there's a categorical difference between, say, the gay rights movement and what's happening about transgender issues and all these other identifications and things, because people have got all this campaigning infrastructure and they've got to push for it.
I don't think they even believe in it. I think it's just activism. I genuinely do. I honestly, listen, this is great. James Price talks sense. I decided I'd identify as a British man. I mean, oh God, shock, horror, really? And that's the point, isn't it? It's just ludicrous. And I think when I say to myself that there are few of us left, there are far more than a few, but there are people who are too scared to say what they feel anymore. And I just think that's really sad, mate. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I think I've made a point, and you have as well, in recent years, just to think, well, look, if they're going to come after you and cancel you and accuse you of being things that you're not and being evil and all the rest of it, then it's going to happen anyway. And I'd rather
been there, done that, worn the T-shirt. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Yeah. Right. Listen, we've got to get to it. This is astonishing to me, right? So a man who stabbed a bloke in the back to get his job, Rishi Sunak, has this afternoon said that Boris Johnson's backing will make a difference. This on the back of, I think, 10,000 leaflets with either his picture on or his signature on, going out to voters in Redwall. It's like a mail drop. This is Sunak, who single-handedly wanted him gone because he came back on that plane, Johnson, was going to stand again, had the votes, and Sunak said no. So yet more desperation, JP. More desperation.
Yeah. Well, look, the gospel according to Luke 15:7, there is more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repenteth. So let's hope now that it's keeping on that biblical theme. As Ronald Reagan said, the 11th commandment was that thou shalt not criticize a fellow conservative. That maybe finally, after all the kind of psychodramas of the last few years, with only, 3 weeks to go?
Yeah. Is it that long?
Stop stabbing each other in the back and focus on the fact that we're about to get an incredibly dangerous, damaging left-wing socialist government in the Labour Party who've received absolutely no scrutiny and going to make even more of a horlicks of running the country than the last 5 Tory PMs have managed to do by a long way.
And I think that's the point. And I think your frustration in your voice mirrors what many people in this country think. And all the polling will tell you that Labour's going to have a landslide. I think people have accepted that, right? But your words, your discussion about scrutiny, still this tax. Today they've come out, Labour, and said we won't raise council tax. I don't think there's anybody who believes that they won't raise capital gains or inheritance tax or fuel duty that will affect 17 million drivers in this country. And the Tory party has been so intent on tearing itself to shreds that they haven't, as you quite rightly say, attacked Labour on the very things that Labour are vulnerable on. And it's going to be a walkthrough. And that, I think, if you're a Tory voter or a Tory fan from the past, must drive you nuts.
Yeah, absolutely right. We're going to need, with a lot of high quality Conservative MPs, because there are still some, or there were still some in this last parliament, along with, unfortunately, far too much dross, some really good parliamentarians. We're going to need some good people left inside Parliament to be able to make these sorts of arguments and to scrutinise Labour. So look at their manifesto. There are something like 33 odd reviews that they're going to go into.
Like a review.
Yeah, well, what that means is we're going to tell you what we think about this in a few years' time after you've elected us and given us all the power. This is enough to make a cat laugh, and they're not getting any kind of attention for this.
Who do you blame for this? And I'm not trying to point the finger, but I keep saying it. We've talked before. Sunak, walked into Downing Street, forget the chaos, I'm going to change things. I think 18 months down the line, it's even more chaotic than, don't get me wrong, the Liz Truss thing. Boris Johnson had some cake, I'll always say that. But here's what I would say. Rishi Sunak has not done a good job, not by anybody's standards. He's not run a good campaign, has he?
As Adam Smith said, there's plenty of ruin in a nation. There's a lot of blame, unfortunately, to go around. I think that the cardinal sin that has been made, probably Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak, all of them have used at times some very right-wing rhetoric. So, we're going to stop the boats, we're going to send them back, we're going to do all these very draconian things, whether it's Theresa May and the inhospitable environment for illegal, all these sorts of things. And then the way they've governed has been incredibly left-wing, has been incredibly big state, has been not challenging the civil service in any way. So we've got the worst of all worlds, where people think, the Tories are evil and right-wing, but haven't got any of the benefits of what evil right-wing policies.
Well, just give you Brexit. I completely agree with you, and that's why reform. Which I mean, Farage said yesterday. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'll stop the boats crossings in 100 days, slash taxes, and can be prime minister by 2030. Whether you believe this or not, whether the Tories will say, as they've done, voting reform risks a generation of Labour. That's not the argument. The argument should be look at what Labour are offering and pull that to shreds. I would have thought if I was anything to do with it. But what he has got, Farage, is people's ear. Because he's actually saying the very red meat things that a lot of Tory voters do not associate with the Tory party anymore. And every single poll will tell you there's no great love for Keir Starmer. It's an open goal, and I'm astonished. Well, I'm not astonished. I'm just amazed that they don't kick the ball into it, but they won't.
No, you got it exactly right. I mean, reckonings are never meant to be pleasant things. No. But unfortunately, the Conservative Party, my party that I've worked so hard for in lots of different jobs for a long time, since, frankly, before any teenager should be interested in politics, is coming to face a reckoning on this. And I think that one of the big conversations when, I suspect it is now when, my party loses and looking to the future of how we rebuild and what we do is how we deal with this threat from reform to the right. Because they're saying a lot of sensible things and then, they've not had any time inside government to have messed anything up. So they're not tarnished in the way that being in charge of a country for a long time has been, but they're saying a lot of sensible things. And it's unconscionable that we're losing people who should be good Conservative voters and supporters for all the good things that the Tory party is good at. It should be tough on crime, should be tough on immigration, should be good on the economy. We're losing on all these things, and people are understandably having a little look at
I believe the people have... I'm with you. I believe people have stopped listening to Sunak. I do. I mean, I've sat here for 3 weeks doing this. I think they've stopped listening to him. I think there's stuff he could have said and done differently. I don't think it's just fatigue. I think there's a general apathy about politics in general. But you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, what do you make, right? So most people would say that they think that this, according to the opinion polls, is going to be a Labour landslide. We were talking about this yesterday. The Tory party could be 70 seats, 100 seats, 120 seats. Your party. Who do you think will run it? Because he's not going to stay. People are throwing out, they're throwing out. I said Generic yesterday. Somebody said Priti Patel. A lot of people saying Kemi Badenoch. Do you think that the Tory party can survive with a leader who, yet again, we go back to John Major, has to pull all the different factions together? Or do you think that right wing, that caucus of people who want, strong military, secure borders, crime, not a fear of crime, but dealing with crime, low taxation, do you think they will gravitate away? Not maybe reform or thinking about the STP in years gone by, that there will be a new party? Do you think the Tories can recover?
There's a lot of big, important questions there, and getting those questions right will be whether this country survives, frankly, into the 21st century or becomes an irrelevant kind of husk. I think that if we end up with a sort of more left-wing leader of the Conservative Party, I think that will be the end of it. I think lots of MPs, lots of members, lots of donors will all move to reform, and the right will be split for a very long time. I think that's a very scary idea. I think the names you mentioned are probably, along with maybe James Cleverly, they're probably the front runners. And the nice thing is that despite the poor record that we've sadly had in the last few years in government, they're all really talented people. Robert Jenrick started off, and in his own words, he was a kind of a careerist who didn't put a foot wrong, and some people called him Robert Generic. Well, he went into that Home Office to keep an eye on Suella Braverman. He was, and I think in his own words, radicalised by the facts of seeing just how bad things are, how impossible it was to get the civil service to do the things that needed to be done to secure our borders and make our country safe and strong from internal and external threats. Right? That's someone who's got a fire in his belly. Kemi Badenoch, right? She's got some of that Thatcherite steel that's needed to take on the big reforms. And Priti Patel, again, has that experience in the Home Office of thinking, my God, I keep telling people to do stuff and they won't do it. The permanent secretary was some posh white bloke, was fired and said she was a bully, probably because he didn't like the idea that this right-wing brown woman was telling him what to do, and he didn't want to do any of it. So, these are people who are battle-hardened, and so hopefully they've got the mettle it will take to pull the party back together, because I think there's a great chance, one last great chance for the Tory party to come back at the next election, because Starmer is going to make such a horlicks of it all.
Finally, and you're brilliant, I love having you on. We started this by saying that the BBC, you can apply for a job if you identify as dead. You'll love this from Clive and Solihull. When I had the COVID jab, tell James, they asked me how I was identifying myself on that particular Tuesday morning. When I said white Anglo-Saxon male, the woman nearly had a bleeding fit. That's what's wrong with the world. James Price, you're a legend. Thank you for coming on. JP will be on very soon. This is Talk Driving.